Hey, what's good, my people? So in the last video, we went in depth on the Icene's path from Hollow to Gielinor and the construction of Everlight, its success and expansion, trade, and military, Drakan's actions in the coup against Zaros, and finally the eventual downfall of Hollowvale. In this episode, we see further the chokehold Drakan presses upon the region, the 6 brothers who defy odds to bring Drakan to his knees, and the twisted pursuit of a particularly pesky Majora, Sliske. Let's begin. I want to start this video off by pointing out something that may have been passed up in the last video if you hadn't been paying close attention, something that will become one of the major focus down the line. In Queen Efaritay's final journal entry, after a few vampires had sneaked into the castle and breached the royal chambers, she was able to smuggle out her son Safalaans to safety to some of the still neutral human settlements, along with his trusted and loyal constituents. Drakan was well aware of his existence, effectively the last Icene of the hallowed name left. Drakan sought his elimination and, shortly after Everlight fell, tasked one of his closest vampires to track down the young Safalaans and kill him. The truly evil mastermind about this, though, is that this cruel and powerful noble set aside to make the hit on the young boy was really his father, Ascertes, who Drakan had turned into a mindless follower, none other than Vanstrom Claws. Safalaans somehow managed to evade Vanstrom and will survive the 3rd, 4th, and 5th ages, albeit with increasing difficulty. We will catch up with him later. After the Battle of Everlight, we know that other large groups of Sardaman reinforcements were able to escape by sea, in large part to the cowardice, or sensibility, however you see it, of Arkan Babel, although he was not so lucky. Most all of the troops would relocate and scatter all throughout Misthalin. On the other hand, many were taken by Drakan's forces and held in captivity, suffering in horrid ways. To save themselves from him, they engaged in a special ritual, effectively ensuring a safe passage of their soul to the afterlife, when they would eventually die. This was relayed to us in the Legacy of Sirge's quest, when Drezel says,
"It seems to me that those people who couldn't escape to Misthalin engaged in a special religious ceremony. Petrified of losing their eternal souls to Drakan, they knew they couldn't avoid being taken over by him, so they made a special sort of deal with Saradomin. If someone was to come and save them from Drakan, the fate worse than death, and their eternal soul is sent to Saradomin, the Savior will gain the key to their worldly possessions."
Upon capturing Hollowvale, Drakan claimed the Hollow's castle and appointed himself dictator of the region, quickly establishing a solid totalitarian government consisting of members of House Drakan, not to be rivaled by either friend or foe. Drakan oversaw the first of many historical censorships, renaming Hollowvale Morytania and splitting its capital into Mirditch and Darkmire, dubbing the southeastern portions of the nation the Sanguinesti region. Hollowvale's castle, formerly the home of Ascertes and Efaritay, was renamed Castle Drakan, and made the home of much of the vampiric nobility, and was appropriately adorned as such. Much of the region's lands were divided into smaller territories, granted to major players such as Malik and Decius, although most of this land is no longer used. It could be said that at some point during this time period, some structures such as the Haunted Mine and the Lair of Tarn Razor Lore in southwestern Morytania may have been commissioned and operational by Drakan, but to what extent and for what underlying and nefarious purposes is still unknown. Drakan, through unknown means, putrefied and diseased Hollowvale's forest into a decaying swamp of death, and resulting in swamp gases becoming so diluted that it would block the sunlight, preventing vampires in Morytania from being destroyed, even during the day. Morytania Swamp would become uninhabitable, haunted by starved gas seeking nourishment, and the flora and fauna native to the area would be forced to undergo drastic evolutionary mutations to survive. Some, such as the leeches and giant snails, have since grown to sizes ranging from several to hundreds of times their previous size, that may be related to pollutants in the area's water, or perhaps sheer magical corruption. The thick fog that now covers Morytania is dense enough to filter the light in eastern Mistland during sunrise, effectively bathing the land in perpetual darkness. And north of the Sanguinesti and east of Morytania, feral, ravenous vampires stalked what are today known as the Haunted Woods. Over the course of the following centuries, the vampires would also valiantly attempt to eradicate the blisterwood trees that grew in Morytania. The magical wood's morphing nature allowed it to constantly change shape and thus bypass the vampire's mind-reading abilities, which normally prevent them from being hurt since they can predict every attack, thus potentially providing material that could harm the vampires. Eventually, the tree disappeared from the lands and the vampires thought it to have gone extinct. In order to maintain control, the vampires established the Vampyre Watch, a brutal police force who would patrol Morytania, which was built as a maze-like blood-farming ghetto with no evident way out. All previously existing entrances were sealed, leaving the city virtually inescapable. The Vampyre Watch were capable of flight, and as such needed no pathways, entrances, or ground-level transport to mobilize. The thousands of humans on the ground, though, found themselves in high-rise structures built deliberately to make movement near impossible, and therefore resulting in little to no infrastructure. Morytania was divided into 6 sectors, each roughly square and making up a sixth of a grid-like pattern that covered the whole of the city. Each sector was isolated from the others through barricades and strategic construction, although more physically abled residents could manage to cross sector borders with some effort. The populace of each section of the city was forced to give blood tithes as a form of tax. To control the amount of deaths and victims, Drakan created a system in which the sectors are tithed in rotational order, allowing residents to replenish themselves enough for the next payment. The means by which these tithes are extracted have varied over time, from simply making incisions on the victim's body and collecting the blood in containers, to more experimental methods that the vampires have studied but never perfected. The effects of blood farming on the residents of Morytania immediately proved disastrous. Although extremely small youth seem to be exempt from tithing, even young children are forced to pay blood to the Vampyre Watch. The majority of the city's residents developed anemia, leaving the people perpetually fatigued, weak, and ill. Additionally, the Vampyre Watch's methods were often brutal and violent, with mass slaughter and sadism not being uncommon. Drakan, considering humanity little more than cattle, paid little attention to living conditions within Morytania, allowing the city's water supply to become contaminated with toxins, and food, clothing, even suitable shelter have become increasingly rare, and thousands have died within the ghetto's walls from violence, the effects of blood tithing, and the elements. Before moving forward, it is important to note that at an unknown date, Sliske and Lord Drakan would reach an agreement that allowed Sliske to use the Barrows for his own purposes. What Drakan received in return was never brought to light. At the end of the God Wars, a SithisRS campaign was launched, consisting of an army of several thousand mercenaries and warriors, in an attempt to reclaim Morytania in the name of their god. In a small village in a remote area of Misthalin, 6 brothers tilled the land, a small farm passed down to them from previous generations. From the intensive everyday manual labor and the slow-passing days, part of the brothers' regiment was also dedicated to learning how to fight, as they knew that was the most likely ticket for their escape from the countryside. Well, it just so happened that this SithisRS force made a stop at their quaint village on the way to the River Solve. One aspect of the brothers that isn't quite as disciplined as the others, though, is their drinking, and, well, their anger to go with it. At the bar in the village, the brothers could be seen downing pint after pint as the day wore on. At one point, the commander of the army, Jakelith, in a drunken stupor, started a brawl with Guthin. Guthin had been attacking Aram, who had just killed Isolde, Guthin's girlfriend, whom Aram took out claiming to save his brother's soul. After Guthin handled his brother, still in a fit of rage, turned to the commander who had started swinging on him, and he struck him with such force that he killed him on the spot. At a moment's notice, the doors swung open, a massive figure standing in the frame, their silhouette illuminated by the sinking sun. Knowing that he would be hanged in the subsequent investigation, Guthin bargained with the hooded figure, who requested that all 6 brothers join the Crusades. After joining, Sliske, unbeknownst to the brothers, granted them special abilities and equipment to aid them in their fight. What will be the outcome of all of this? This is the Morytania Campaign. In an official lore document titled The Fall of Six, written by an unknown author at an unknown date, and adapted from the crumbling tome found at the site of the Barrows, gives us a better look into Sliske's first meeting with the brothers. It reads,
The 6 were brothers hailing from one of the smaller townships of Misthalin. They had shown a glimmer of prowess in combat even back then, though their chores as farmers chewed up much of their time. If they had been born in another age, their lives would have been filled with thankless obscurity. But in this age of the God Wars, there were many opportunities for such men to earn renown. Their thirst for fame is what led the stranger to them. For although their skills were unmatched in their township, they desired to be the best of all men, and the stranger had promised them this, for he knew power and could grant it. His long years had taken him to many distant lands, where he had collected much arcane knowledge and many artifacts of value and strength, and it was those very weapons and armor he had given them that they now wielded, which granted them their desire. If they had not been blinded by such desires, had heard the deviousness in the stranger's voice, or could have seen the calculating eyes hidden deep within the dark recesses of his cowl, then they may have taken a different path.
As the campaign set off, the troops battled mightily against the endless waves of Drakan's forces. As they moved deeper into the territory, though, that's when the heroics emerged. The document continues.
The stranger had watched the campaign from its first footfall into the lands east of the river, always from afar. His lidless eyes were affixed to the 6 commanders, resplendent in their armor, their weapons poised to attack as yet unmet foes. Behind each commander, a phalanx of war-hardened soldiers, their metallic armor glinting even in the pale light of these dead lands, brilliant fingers of light inching towards the heart of Hallowville. The campaign moved with great speed, deeper and deeper into the darkness, For a year, many battles were fought like the one the stranger now watched below. The phalanxes engaged the rank and file, spurred on by the brothers' fearlessness and courage, while the brothers themselves squared up to the enemy champions. Arim, the eldest brother, crumbled his foes with powerful magics and set their strength and their will to fight. Tarok and Gutton, the next eldest, did not need their foes to be weakened to decimate them. Great arcs cleaving, limbs from bodies, spears skewering organs. The brothers were strongest when united, fighting side by side or back to back. Should any enemy manage to survive long enough and have the chance to strike a blow, Kara would fire a swat of bolts to pepper their chest as they took their swing, throwing them back. This battle was the campaign's most unrelenting and bloody. The brothers' confidence and skill had grown over the years as the power they wielded made them feel invincible, made them living heroes to their followers. The straggling enemy survivors were routed, but even they were cut down. Try as they might to flee, Torok pounded them into the dirt, and their prayers rang hollow as Varrock flayed the skin from their bones. Another victory. A thin smile slowly curled upon the stranger's mouth, snake teeth protruding, and he thought, truly, they are worthy. Now is the time, before he slowly and deliberately turned heel and made his way down from his cliff top perch to the battlefield remnants below and the camp the brothers' army was now constructing.
Weary from the exhaustion, the troops took up camp a distance away from the footholds of Drakan's fortresses. Ache in their bones, but with high spirits, they celebrate all the triumphs that had come before. That is, until Sliske reappeared with an ominous warning. The brothers, now unsure of themselves. The text continues.
Dusk had settled by the time he had arrived at the camp. There was much song and laughter, rejoicing of the day's battle and stories of valor. Various beasts were slowly roasting on spits over open fires, the crackling lost among the din of celebration, sparks dancing in the cool half-light. He picked his path through the piles of litter of the camp, but his path was always directly towards the brothers. As more became aware of his presence, a silence enshrouded the camp, as if the stranger himself were holding their mouths shut. To the surrounding army, it looked no more than the robed stranger staring into each of the brothers' eyes, but to the brothers it was the realization of their fate. They froze in unison, as if caught in the path of a crushing wall of water, finally understanding the cost of the deal they had struck with the stranger. Mistalin now felt so very far away, a different land, a different time. The brothers, once united by blood and by bloodshed, and by the pact they had taken together, now stood alone. Their power had separated them from other mortal men. Now it had separated them from each other. The silent stranger's message could be heard only in the brothers' minds, a raspy, conspirational whisper. The time has come, my warriors. The gifts I bestowed upon you have served you well, and you, in turn, have served your god. Now it is time to begin your servitude to me, to my god. You shall stand ever vigilant for his return, and then you will be champions in his glorious army. We shall have victory against the usurper, but first you must die. The brothers flinched back, hands tightening all weapons, but the stranger did not attack. After this briefest of moments to the onlooking soldiers, a lifetime to the brothers, the stranger turned and strode to the edge of the camp, back through the charred remains of the defeated and the victorious dead. The brothers just stood and watched in shock as the old figure disappeared from the camp, delving into the shadows at its edge. But the silence remained, and with it now a palpable tension, the air thick with doubt and unease. The stranger returned once again to his perch above the battlefield and watched as the last of the light fell from the sky and as the campfires burned themselves out. The rays of morning slowly crept around the camp like a beast stalking its prey, stirring the army to wake. It went some way to renewing the soldiers' hope, but the brothers themselves remained silent, as if they had absorbed all the doubt and despair their followers carried the previous night. Camp was broken, and the retinue continued its journey further still towards the heart of these dark lands. Despite the meeting with the stranger, the brothers still had their purpose, and even though they now knew its full extent, they continued bravely on, resigned.
certainly perturbed by the Mahjara's words, but nonetheless confident. The final conclusion reads,
Yet more battles followed that fated night, the enemy growing in number and strength. The stranger, now clearly visible in his observation of them, no longer concealing his presence. The brothers continued to fight as heroes among men, yet they slowed, they erred. Arim's spells would miss, Darrok's strength declined, and gotten weakened by the day, Carol no longer managed to stay the blows of his targets. His brothers receiving wounds before he could fill their enemies with bolts, Torak slowed and Farak seemed to instill less fear in his opponents. They bruised and bled, requiring tending from their medics after each skirmish. Now at the heart of this accursed land, as the sun fell low in the sky, the stranger watched again as they pitched their final camp, watched as they rested, and watched as the marshaled forces of their enemy crashed upon the camp. Demons, wolves and hounds, undead creatures and other such horrors. The brothers fought bravely one last time, rallying their troops to them, fending off the dread beast's raid. Many men fell around them, yet despite their losses, together they managed to set the enemy to retreat, striking a heavy blow in return. At first light the camp was refortified, but the brothers fell around their campfire. All morn and eve they were tended upon once more, but this time they did not recover. Muttering feverishly, their wounds did not close and their breathing weakened. Even in the act of dying they fought against the darkness, clinging to all the life they could. But much as the sun above giving way to night, so too was their fate inevitable. As the last rays of light failed, so too did the brothers and the campaign with them. Sorrow and despair now afflicted the camp. The remaining officers came to the realization that without their leaders they were lost and must now turn back if there were to be any hope of survival. But as a reflection of the brothers' bravery, they vowed to honor their martyred heroes as a final act before retreating. For 6 days, the survivors dug up the earth and built crypts for the brothers. For 6 nights, their enemies surrounded the camp, chiding and praying, mocking the loss of their leaders, breaking their spirits but not attacking. The stranger took no joy from this. He had no love for either side, his involvement complete. On the last day he watched the crypts being covered and the burial mounds completed, and the remnants of the brothers' army turned their back on the dark to begin their long journey home. As they passed from view, he turned, again walking deliberately and slowly towards the brothers, now dead and interred in their barrows. Arms outstretched atop the central mound, the stranger chanted in some foul ancient language, casting his old magic. A vulgar purple light formed in front of him, fell to the earth and bled into each of the barrows.
After the death of the brothers, Sliske raised them as his undead minions and tasked them with guarding a precious erosion artifact, an icon that absorbed prayer energy that would later be retrieved by one of Sliske's counterparts. In the end, Drakan would sustain a numerous amount of casualties in his ranks, but due to the brothers' death, would ultimately end up victorious. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Thank you to my readers, Sithis for voicing Drezel, and Poinntter for reading the Fall of Six. See you in the next one. RuneScape forever.